I wanted to do something new, something different, when I realized there's not a lot of videos from PokeTubers about their friends who aren't crazy fans of Pokemon, and there's no videos asking those friends who they think the strongest Pokemon in the game are. I think we could get some pretty entertaining results out of this. So I went into our personal Discord, I asked, yo guys, who do you think the best Pokemon in the game are? Not your favorites, which ones do you think are the strongest? And I think that this could still work out, because for the most part, everyone has interacted with Pokemon at some point in their life, that even if it was earlier on, or as long as they've kept some kind of interest, they should be aware as to what a Pokemon's strength is. Now, I did say no legendaries, that way I just wouldn't get people that are like Mewtwo, Rayquaza, Kyogre, or something like that. But overall, I would say that if we look at this little graph right here, my friends kind of fall into this section of the graph because they still have an interest in Pokemon. And with me being a close friend that is actually doing Pokemon for a living, they are kind of keeping tabs as to what's going on. Now, some friends are more invested in others, but they're not super competitive. I think we can get some pretty interesting results. Also, before we get into this list, please leave a like and comment down below who do you think has the best list of my friends mentioned in this video. So friend number 1 is going to be Jesse. Now, Jesse is an interesting Pokemon fan because he spends a lot of time on 4chan and VP. So he kind of has his finger on the pulse of the community, but not in a serious way, and he's a pretty major troll of the group. So this is going to be his list of top 10 memes. Now, he is serious in thinking that these are the strongest Pokemon in the game. So we have Sigilyph at number 10, Cofagrigus at number 9, Yanmega at number 8, Togekiss at number 7, Machamp at number 6, Gyarados at number 5, Metagross, Tyranitar, Garchomp, and then Wobbuffet. Now, I can actually understand a lot of this list, and one trend that I kind of noticed throughout all of my friends is that they don't know anything about the 7th generation. That when it comes to 7th generation, a lot of my friends usually dropped off around the 4th generation, and even when it comes to like my brother, Ace Trainer Troy, he was mostly active in the 6th generation, so when it comes to newer Pokemon, people are just kind of like, yeah, 4th generation was awesome. I remember like all those big evolutions that were introduced from older Pokemon, and they were pretty strong. So we can see that that's where a lot of the list is going. But overall, Sigilyph, it does have a lot of coolness going on, because you just go, you have Magic Guard into Cosmic Power, you have Sustain, and then you can run like Toxic Orb, so you just don't have to worry about any status or anything. And then you can even like Psycho Shift to put a status on them. So Sigilyph has been a pretty powerful Pokemon. He said Cofagrigus, since it shuts down abilities, it's a pretty strong one as well. Togekiss is frustrating, Machamp is solid, Gyarados and Metagross, people are always talking about them for being pretty strong. Gyarados with that Intimidate shutting down, Mega Metagross, very powerful Pokemon. Garchomp makes it into pretty much everyone's lists as well, because it's just a Pokemon they've always seen hanging around. That it seems like a Pokemon that's rather common, and it seems pretty strong because of it. But I like his number 1. I honestly like his number 1 a lot, because when I do my top 10 Pokemon list, I put Pokemon like Smeargle, Pokemon like Ditto in the top 10, and I just hold Ditto as the strongest Pokemon in the game, because it's your opponent's Pokemon, everything included, stats, boosts, but better, because you can have a specific item advantage in that situation. And Wobbuffet kind of does the same thing. That against offensive Pokemon, Wobbuffet just comes in, traps them, and then they get completely bodied. And then Wobbuffet also has the freedom to switch out and then kind of leave their opponent in a really bad situation, that they can't double switch out of it, or they can't really do much once the Wobbuffet hits the field. So it does give you a lot of presence, and also getting a little bit of a buff in the 7th generation with the Confusion Berries. That way you can just stay on the field for longer, retaliate more damage, and then you just use it as a revenge Pokemon. You bring it in, if they're choiced, they're pretty much screwed. And even if they're not choiced, as long as they only have offensive options, they're pretty much screwed. So Wobbuffet is going to walk away with a lot of KOs, or at least it's going to trade like one Wobbuffet for 2 of their strongest sweeping Pokemon, which means if you have like anti-tanks on your team or wall breakers, then Wobbuffet can set that up pretty hard. So it looks like he does pretty much understand what it could take to kind of like have some gimmicks inside of a top 10 list and then represent it pretty well. Next on the list, I'm going to talk about John. John is really interesting because he has a wife and a kid, a family, a career. He's the oldest and most mature in our group of friends, but he's also a really serious gamer. He plays pretty much everything. Has experience in EVE, Overwatch, League of Legends, just kind of plays every game out there, and does have a little bit of an interest in Pokemon. Like whenever there's a Pokemon Kotaku article, he'll talk about it with me, and he does show interest towards my career as well, but he's still just like a really old Pokemon fan. So this is going to be his list for the top 10. Number 10, Alakazam. Number 9, Klefki. And then he kind of has like his little logic behind it. So Klefki, Steel plus Fairy equals Goodbye Dragons. I think he likes all the memes about how it's like jingle jingle keys and then dragons just like get completely wrecked right there. He loves the design of Metagross. So, since my friends aren't like the most serious competitive people, they also will put kind of like their favorite Pokemon in the list of their top 10 strongest as well. But fortunately for him, Mega Metagross is pretty strong and regular Metagross is as well. He calls Gyarados a dragon, therefore it's number 7. Blissey is on the list as well because that is a terrifying Pokemon. Ever since Blissey was introduced, it's like, yeah, you just soft-boiled and then you just wall out your opponent's entire team and they don't get to do anything about it. Also, we see Garchomp on the list as well, see him everywhere, so kind of my friend's logic. If the Pokemon's everywhere, then it's got to be one of the best, right? And then Scyther. So Scyther is interesting. He was kind of like considering this from a gameplay standard as well. Not really competitive, but just the best Pokemon to play through the game. So False Swipe made capturing Pokemon easier. He liked Meganium more than the Venusaur, so found it more useful in battle. Machamp had one with all of the elemental punches, wrecked Elite Four on Silver and Gold version. So because of that, just high amounts of cover, high amounts of damage, and made game pretty easy. Then number 1, Gengar. We have a fast ghost type Pokemon with a high amount of special, and it just goes and wrecks things. Now, if you're taking it in as a top 10 for all of the Pokemon in the game, it's not the strongest list, but you do see some understanding, and there are some pretty feared Pokemon that would make it into some top 10s as well. Now, one interesting thing is that there was a follow-up comment. I thought about including Aegislash, but went Klefki instead. That being said, would probably pick the former over the latter in my own personal team, simply because it looks awesome. Now, I think he doesn't understand that Klefki got substantial nerfs in the 7th generation. Maybe with that understanding, he would put Aegislash somewhere on the list, and Aegislash is definitely one of the strongest Pokemon ever introduced. So I think he does have an understanding of, like, even a badass Pokemon, it can still be a really strong one to make it on a top 10 list. And now it's time to talk about Sean. Now, old school fans of this channel might remember Sean from like RuneScape videos, League of Legends videos. I think he made a couple of Pokemon videos as well, and we've been friends since early high school, so a very long time at this point, and we pretty much like just met and like secured our friendship over a massive love of Pokemon, and then it was always like, I'm a better Pokemon fan, no, I'm a better Pokemon fan, and stuff like that. So it was pretty ridiculous back in the 4th generation. Now, he kind of never really got into 5th, 6th, or 7th generation, so his mentality is a little bit behind. Let's go and see his top 10 list. Number 1, Hagron. Well, actually, I guess we'll do 10 and then go reverse. So number 10 is going to be Pangoro. Number 9, Metagross. Number 8, Gardevoir. Number 7 is Onix, and he specifically told me that Steelix looks dumb, therefore Onix is better. Number 6, Scyther. Number 5, Dragonite. Number 4, Flygon. Then we have Salamence, Charizard, and number 1 is going to be Aggron. Now, also one thing that John said, and I guess it kind of works for everyone that I'm talking about, is if that Pokemon does have a Mega variant, just kind of add that to the list as well. So we have like Mega Aggron for shenanigans, Mega Charizard. I mean, Charizard is one of the most used Pokemon in the battle spot, so it could reasonably get a top 10, if not a top 5, in a top 10 best Pokemon list. A lot of people talking about Salamence, Dragonite, and there's Scyther again. Now, Scyther is definitely a Pokemon to talk about because I recently discovered how incredible Scyther is as a Pokemon. Has a really good speed stat and then the same base stat total as Scizor, but you can still kind of run some high damage items on it, get the good amount of speed. So it's pretty much like if you're not relying on Bullet Punch on the Scizor and you can still outspeed everything with the Scyther, Scyther is going to be just as devastating, if not more devastating, than the Scizor. So it's a very surprising Pokemon that does absolutely ridiculous stuff. I find it crazy that I was on the list for both John and Sean because I don't think they quite understand what makes Scyther actually a really good Pokemon, but it still kind of makes some sense on their list. Then we have like Gardevoir, Metagross, so a lot of the standard Pokemon that are pretty strong just kind of finding their way onto the list as well. It's either like design or just, hey, I gotta use this Pokemon because it's so good in battle, and then it ends up working out pretty well. Now, Sean does have a brother who is the biggest Haunter fan in all of Pokemon. If he could do a list, it would be numbers 1 through 10, all would be Haunter, so I do have to give him an honorable mention for the Haunter right there, even as one of the strongest Pokemon ever. And now it's the one you've all been waiting for, my twin brother, the real Ace Trainer Troy on YouTube and Twitter. Now, this is a really crazy one to talk about because Troy was competitive in the 6th generation. He did a lot of videos, a lot of battles, and understands Pokemon, except he hasn't made a video in like over a year, and he hasn't really cared about Pokemon for 2 years now, so he's a bit rusty, but at least more modern than pretty much anyone else in my friend group. So it was kind of hard to get him to like kind of step up and do this, but he eventually gave me a list, and then we had Dragonite at number 1. I did put Dragonite as the number 1 dragon Pokemon. It's just really good. Multi-scale, weakness policy, GG, and even, like, now there's, like, mind games on top of Dragonite as well. Give it a Lumberry, because people do not throw super effective hits at Dragonite, therefore your Dragonites could be safer, and then Lumberry into free Dragon Dance, and then you just wreck them for the rest of their day, so pretty good right there. Number 2, Skarmory. He always runs just the filthiest tank Skarmory for stall ever. Works out pretty well for him. Excadrill, powerful Pokemon. I personally wouldn't put number 3 on a top 10 list, but I mean, it's still a pretty strong steel and ground type. Flygon, now with Dragon Dance, pretty solid. Porygon Z, I mean, we did get the Z conversion buff. Porygon Z has been a really scary Pokemon, and then he remembered Tyranitar, and then he gave me the full list. So now we have Dragonite, number 1, Skarmory, number 2, Excadrill, number 3, and then Tyranitar, number 4. So he thinks Tyranitar is a very powerful Pokemon, and then 7 through 10 is going to be Clefable, Aegislash, Landorus, and Drifblim. So it seems like he does have respect for the Minimize Baton Pass Death Balloon, and I guess that's just because I've been talking about it for the last 10 years or so. I've also read him with that Drifblim at least 8 times in battle, so I think he does have to give enough respect to it to put the number 10 on the list. And then he sees like, alright, Landorus, that's used by Smogon a lot. This is pretty much his logic as well. He knows Aegislash is strong, and then Clefable is just an absolute monster. So there we go. That's not all my friends. I have more than just 4 friends, but the other ones, they kind of didn't really care, or they didn't feel that they would do anything worth of value. Like one of my friends, Mo, he was just like, oh, Charmander number 1, and then I'll put Growlithe at number 10. It's like, oh. So some of my friends, they weren't taking this one seriously. They just decided to troll, or they weren't really too interested enough to be a part of the video. But the ones that did, I think it actually leads to some pretty interesting results. But I think the biggest surprise is that I've known these people for many years now, that they have had interest in Pokemon through the time I've known them, except they just didn't care about the 7th generation. They don't think that Pokemon Sun and Moon is bad or anything, they just didn't want to go as hard into Pokemon as they had in the past, and then that kind of led to these rustier, kind of old school lists, but somehow still have viability and relevance as a top 10 Pokemon list. So I think it was a pretty interesting kind of thing to interact with my friends and see what they did. They're very supportive of my career making Pokemon videos. They have a lot of respect for it as well, but they do make fun of me a lot at the same time, since I am kind of one of the most hated people in the Pokemon community. So there's a good amount of back and forth. They are at least interested in Pokemon because of me, and I think that led to these cool little lists right here. So if you guys enjoyed the video, hope you all have a nice day. Thank you very much for watching.